All right, hello and welcome to episode 14. My plan last week was to use this weekend to paint the parts that I took out the bus last week and prepared. Unfortunately, as you might be able to see, it is chucking down out there and it's been raining all night as well, so it's damp in here. This is not really a good time to put paint on anything. So I'm going to do some wet stuff today. I'm going to wash down the inside of the cab and rub that down, and I'm also going to see if I can remove some of the grease and grime that sits just under the cab by the offside front wheel. So I'm going to have a go at that today. But as that might not be particularly interesting for film, we'll have a chat about something I discovered on the RT probably about 9-10 months ago, and unfortunately it wasn't good, and it was the tip of an iceberg, and a hell of a lot of work had to be done to correct what was, or appeared to be on the surface of it, a very tiny problem. Anyway, with it chucking down out there, my first priority now is to put the kettle on. So the kettle goes on. Hopefully you enjoy this edition, and I look forward to your comments below.
Okay, well, at least the pheasants are having fun. There's several here in where we are, outside the barn, and you can hear them making a racket, but there we are. So at least they're having fun in the rain. As I mentioned in the intro, this causes a problem, all this water, because I'm certainly not going to start spraying panels when there's a risk of dampness, because the paint is just simply going to lift off again, or there's a risk of it lifting off. So I really don't want to do that. So I'm going to have to wait for a much nicer day. So what I've decided to do is to swap things around to do sort of wet stuff. So that would be including cleaning underneath the chassis and washing out the cab and stuff like that. So this weekend is very much a wet weekend, unfortunately. Hence the reason why we're going to chat about the tip of the iceberg in a minute.
We haven't done a lot from inside the RT, and there's a good reason for that. I had planned to do this as a winter escapade. Fortunately, the winter wasn't so heavy, and I was able to work outside of the bus. Although we're inside here, it actually does get very cold in the winter and quite warm in the summer as well. So like I say, I had planned to do inside here during the winter time, and we put all of this sheeting up in order to retain a little bit of heat should I decide to turn this into a mini workshop in here. But anyway, here we are inside the RT. This story is about what happens when you find a very small piece of rot. It can often be the tip of an iceberg, and this case proved to be just that, the tip of an iceberg. When I came up here about 9-10 months ago and started clearing up all the muck that was in this place, I found a very small piece of rot just down here on this plinth. And the first thing you think about is, well, that's not going to be too difficult to put right. How wrong was I? It was a really big job, and we had to lift out most of the floor down this side. As you can probably see, I've got all new wooden treads here. This is the boards that sit just underneath the main tread plates that sit there. Unfortunately, all of this had to come out so that we can access the rot. I didn't do any video footage back then. All I did was take stills just to document the work as it went along. But it was quite a big job. But I decided that having completed that we would come into the bus and I'd do these plimps. So these are just this chocolate brown, which I really do like that chocolate brown. That chocolate brown is just a first coat. It's not a final coat. And I know full well that as I put the interior back in, it's going to get scratched and damaged. So hence the reason why I've just put that on there. You may also notice down the edges here, there's a red undercoat. That is where some lino sits. So I'm not going to spray the brown right down to the floor. And just on the edges, just where the floor meets the plinth, the metal plinth, is a little bit patchy, but that doesn't matter because one, you've got cork tiles which run right the way up onto it, and then you've got a kind of finishing piece of wood that sits a bit higher. So what you see at the moment, right at the very floor there, you will not see once the bus is finished. Yeah, a long way off. So as you can see, the inside of this has been stripped down. I took all the ceiling down years ago. This, well, it wasn't too bad, but it had bowed in places, and it gives me access to the wiring conduit, which is a job that I've got on my agenda. I've just noticed something. I was I was looking for the cover that went over the switch panel in the cab, and I hadn't spotted it. It wasn't with all the stuff that I pulled out the other day, and I thought, where's that gone? And I've just noticed I've propped it up there in this space between the light bulb and one of the bits of wood. So I found that now. So I wish I could find everything as easy as that. So anyway, let's get on with this.
Okay, so let's jump into it then. This is the offending item. A small hole in the plinth on the offside of the RT. In fact, if you were able to look through there, you'll actually see the top of the chassis, and you'll see that in a second when we manage to strip it down. But when I first looked at it, I thought, well, you know, that's not going to be too much of a problem to put that right. We'll basically put a plate behind it and fiddle about and get it to look right. But unfortunately, the rot that was there was quite extensive, and the metal work there had become very thin as well. As a result of which, I had a colleague at work who offered to come up and have a look at it for me. He's a very good welder, and he's our coach maker basically. And he came up, had a look, and he said, what we need to do is we need to weld in a plate. But before we weld in a plate, all of that woodwork has got to come out because the risk of setting the bus on fire is quite high. As a result of which, I had to lift the floor out, and this is what I found. The rot had turned out to be more extensive than I thought it was going to be, because all you could see is that little bit there. You couldn't see what was below the floor, and this quite a large section of this had just basically rotted away. Some of the woodwork that was down there was supporting the floor had also diminished as well. Now that is the area where the offside wheel is, so it is subject to a lot of water and water splashing and what have you up underneath there. And all that was on the other side was some, I think years ago, silver paint. So there was no sort of sustained attempt, I suppose, to prevent any rot on it. You can see just rising up in that arch just there, that's the offside chassis as it rises up over the axle. So the first thing I need to do is start to strip out the floor. Now you can just about see on the edge there, you can see the extent, having removed the offside treads that were there, you can actually start to see just down the edge there where it was rotting away. And the woodwork between that sits over the top of the axle tube and forward, as you can see, was in a really poor condition. The woodwork back where my electric screwdriver is, it's an electric screwdriver, is actually much better. So I assume at some point in its career that had rotted quite badly and it had been changed. But nonetheless, that was another project which I needed to add in. But quite honestly, putting back old flooring and stuff like that is not something I'm accustomed to doing. So it would have been replaced anyway, whether it was good, bad or otherwise. This then is the floor as the treads just ahead of the wheel arch has been removed as well. As you can see the lines where the original treads were, and you can see just how bad that floor is. And I've got some pictures of it when I've actually taken it out, because I kept it as a template, and it shows just how well rotted that wood was. So clearly that area there just above the axle had been subject to a considerable amount of water and corrosion and what have you, which explains why it's in such a poor condition. Right, there you go, as promised. The floor sitting on a bin. I think it is in the bin now, but you may notice if you have a look very carefully on the right hand side of that floor, you'll notice that each one of those treads has a number on it, and that was so that when I remade the wood, I know which bit went where. Because interestingly, a bit like that beading I showed you a few episodes back, each one of those treads had a different size, and where they were supposed to be you would have thought was straight, as you can see. Where I've got the top edge straight, the bottom edge is all wobbly. So yeah, I suppose they didn't really bother too much just to putting the floor in. So anyway, hence the reason why each of those are numbered. And when I started to put them back again, I used that as a template and also measured the gap between the two. So hopefully that's okay. And now the offending item, having been removed from the bus, joins its counterpart, the floor. As you can see, that is really rotted. And not only was that bit just on the right hand side there rotted, as you can see, just over on the left of shot, there's another hole. And the edge that supports that wooden block had also started to perish. So it was a fair size chunk that needed to be removed, and I'm pleased really to do it at this point, because it's better to do it now than you know, put the bus back together again and discover we got this problem. As you can see, I've turned an RT into a Flintstones bus you can put your legs through, and I was actually able to stand on the concrete below. You can see the chassis as it rises up over the back axle there. That thing that's sort of between my two legs is the axle tube. And the exhaust is just by my kneecaps there. You can see the exhaust just running sort of left and right. So anyway, that's what it looks like. I did give that area a really good clean, and there was a lot of work needed to be done just to sort of basically tidy it up. So just for demonstration purposes, here is the piece of metal sitting on the wheel arch. So what remains of it, as you can see, there's a little bit of wood just to the bottom there, and that would support the floor, the main bit, which then you've got the treads that sit on top of it. So as you can see, all of that rot along there is invisible. There's no way you'd see it, and it was only when it peaked above the surface, it's the old tip of the iceberg stuff, on the left hand side, where it's peaked above the surface, you can actually see, you know, that's the sign of it waking its way through. So anyway, there we are. There is the old piece of metal sitting fairly close to where it was originally. Right, well, thanks to the art of fabrication and what looks like an old Titan seat, here is the new panel at the top of shot, obviously, and the old panel just below. So once again, I can't emphasise how much of that had just rotted away and how much of it was invisible before the floor line. But bear in mind, I mean, you know, this, you're going to get this. It's a 70-year-old bus. It's going to have these problems. If it hasn't, then I'll be very surprised. I've seen some pictures online of people that have been doing their own RTs, and they're in a far worse situation than this. You know, sadly, they use steel rots. A Routemaster uses aluminium, and although aluminium does sort of corrode, it certainly doesn't corrode to this extent. And the Routmasters that I've taken apart over the years have actually been in really good condition once you take the panels off. Sadly, with an RT, the panels look good, and then underneath it doesn't look so good. Okay, so before my colleague Alan turns up, what I need to do is to apply Cure Rust to the metal areas that are going to be retained. You'll also notice on the right hand side there's a bit of filler on that plinth. There was already filler there, which was a bit of a surprise, and it was a bit manky, especially at the point where the chassis rises up. So I thought, well, I might as well add to it and flatten it off a little bit. That will be entirely covered by lino, so it's not like it's going to be painted or anything like that where it'll be noticeable unless I've got it really fine. So yeah, it basically is what it is. So there we are. So that is the situation before my colleague from work turned up. Right, so here's Alan Wells. He's our coach maker, and he's pretty good at welding. So he took the I don't know what you want to say. He won the prize to come up and do some welding on the bus one Sunday. So I'm very grateful to Alan to making the journey up there. So what he's done is, you can see here, he's just about to start welding in the new section. Right, so having completed the welding, Alan is now grinding down the welds that are left behind just to make things nice and smooth. You can see there, I mean, that was just a few of the sparks that were created, and it highlights really why, if you're going to do anything like this, you're going to have to remove the floor. Anything wooden that's likely to catch fire. We did have some buckets of water and some fire extinguishers on standby in case anything went wrong. And I also did give it several hours after Alan had done his important work to make sure that there were no hot spots on it. Because the last thing I want to do is do all this work and then the thing catches fire, obviously. Right, abracadabra, and that's it finished. Well, sort of, almost. It's been welded in. I've now sprayed it using chassis silver. That was just an initial coat just to get it started, really. So that's what it looks like before I started to put all the floor back together again, then got the paintbrush out. And as if by magic, here are the two plimps all nicely sprayed up now. You will notice, and I know I said that in the previous intro, the red that sits just at the bottom there, that will be covered with lino at some point, so it doesn't really matter. I've also sprayed in the wheel arches, so they're looking sort of quite nice with chassis black. That's what I found. I had a big can of it and I thought I might as well make use of this. So it's a really lovely paint, actually. It's an old paint as well, but it's absolutely beautiful. So yeah, so that's chassis black. You can also see just there on that offside wheel arch, which is to the left of us, the battery isolator that I fitted several years ago. I'm taking that out now, and I'm going to put a well, I'm going to put that back, but I'm going to put some other stuff on there, like a battery boost socket as well. So I've had to make a bit of wooden plate that will sit there, because obviously the battery boost socket, anyone that knows about boost packs will know that the bells that you push in, there's like a big socket thing there. When you go to pull them out, they're often quite stubborn. So pulling on that sort of aluminium there, it's not really designed for that amount of force. So I've had to, I will reinforce it so that it's able to sustain, you know, the cowbells, I think is what they're called. So that's basically the idea. So yeah, so that's where the isolator is. And I fitted that after a nasty incident in Orpington when I first bought the bus. I'd gone down to the yard where it was kept, and I started the bus up, and to my surprise the starter motor jammed, and it jammed under load. And it continued to try to drive the bus, but tried to turn the engine, and it made a hell of a racket. So the only thing I could do was run round the back, lift up the plate that sits over the top of the batteries, find the right spanner, and then start to undo the connections on the battery, by which time they were starting to gas. And anyone that knows about batteries knows there's a potential that with the noxious fumes that come out that could ignite. So yeah, I learnt my lesson there. Fit an isolator, so if anything goes wrong, you can easily knock the thing off. Right, and there's the offside all sprayed up, and the wheel arch all nicely painted. You will notice, I mean, although it's hidden entirely by the seat, but where bricks, I suppose, or large rocks have come up from the wheel, it's bashed on that metal. It's really, I think it's stainless steel. So they've taken quite a pounding, they do, but I'm not going to bother changing that, to be honest with you. That's ridiculous to go that far with it. But you'll also notice, just on the left of shot there, on that silver panel, there's some more rot there as well. So I'm going to have to tackle that at some point. I did spray that silver years ago. I don't know why I didn't tackle that, but anyway, there we are. I think the plan was when I take the outside panels off, I'll be able to get to the other side of it and deal with it then. Right, so side by side, the offside wheel arch and the offending piece of metal. And if we just look down the bottom there, you will notice the nice new shiny brown piece of steel that's now in place. So, and the floor treads have all been replaced, well, partially apart from those three at one end, but all the offending treads have been removed. Those two, 1, 2, 3 on the right hand side weren't actually removed, they remained in the bus all the time. So all the ones that I took out have been replaced, and as you can see, screwed in place now. The plan is that eventually I'll put the main treads back in, but as I work through the bus and when I start doing the interior, this area, the sort of surface dressing, that's the cork tiles and the wood, little sort of, I would say beading, but the strips that run down the centre aisle, they'll be the very last things to go in. So we'll start with the ceiling and then work our way down. And you may wonder why I've actually gone to the bother of painting all of this. Well, I suppose maybe perhaps I shouldn't have done, but there's one good thing is that I can then see if anything doesn't look right, because it's all nice and shiny. You can basically see anything wrong that's there. Plus the fact when I do get to put the floor back in, that brown will go neatly down below the floor line, and I won't have to cut it in later on with masking tape and all the rest of it. So there we are, the two items side by side, and right, well, I think that sort of concludes the tip of the iceberg. Well, at least the pheasants are enjoying the rain and the horrible weather out there. So I thought I might as well make use of the fact it was damp and just make the place even more damp. So having put a degreaser on underneath that bus, as you can see now, I'm just cleaning all the muck off that's under there. This is a power wash that my brother gave me. Thank you, Daryl. So it's the first time I used it. I was somewhat cynical as to whether it'd be any good, because the one I've been using on here is a petrol-driven or diesel-driven one. Fills the barn up with smoke, but there we are. But it's pretty good. We use it down at our base at South Mims for cleaning off things. So yeah, so I don't need to now. I can use this one. So yeah, this worked quite well. So thanks, Daryl. So here we are, finishing off, removing all that muck from underneath. So hopefully by next weekend, which is a bank holiday weekend, it'll be dry in the barn. But I left a rather large pool of water there. So hopefully next time that I get there next week, all of that will be gone. So now it's time to clamber into the cab and carry on with prepping up the inside. As you can see, I've not paint stripped it. I've done what best I can, but I'm using a scraper there on a lot of the sort of loose paint that was around that corner. And you can see I've stripped quite a bit out. I did try to take the steering wheel out. I managed to get the main sort of nut off the top there, but unfortunately it just wouldn't budge, and I didn't fancy sort of damaging the thing, so I decided to leave it in. But you really do have to be sort of be able to contort yourself around the inside of the bus. It is really quite difficult to, as you can see, having to contort myself down there. But anyway, my plan of action next weekend is to get this ceiling here that you see sprayed into it's a kind of semi-matte finish. So my plan is to do that next weekend, and then do the wiring, and then I will work my way down to the brown, which you can just see down by my knee there, and I'll paint the brown and the steering wheel as one of the last things to do, so working from the top downwards. So that's the plan of action. Yeah, so lots of fun. I must admit I didn't enjoy doing this. I got a little bit demoralised, frankly, doing it. It just didn't seem to work to my well, it wasn't exactly exciting. So anyway, luckily in Filmland we can speed all this stuff up, but in reality I was in there for about 2.5 hours, and I'm not going to show you 2.5 hours of footage. That'd be absolutely terrible. So anyway, here we are. So I think we can probably call that a wrap. Right, so before you go, next weekend is a bank holiday weekend, and hopefully the weather's going to be good. The weather forecast currently, and today is Tuesday, is for the weekend to be dry and warm. So perfect, I think, for putting some paint on stuff. So once again, thanks very much for viewing, and I'll leave you to whatever it is you were doing before I come along and interrupted your day.